In February 25, the first round of the peace negotiations with Taliban, initiated by the United States of America, took place in Doha, Qatar, which spiked the hopes for a sustainable peace among all Afghans and all around the country. But all of a sudden, the 9 months of peace efforts seemed to be in vain, with the US government called off the peace negotiations. With the cancellation of peace negotiations, ladies and gentlemen, Afghanistan is now standing on the verge of a very critical situation, because the cancellation of peace process left the situation and the future of war in Afghanistan in question. Now, the situation has gone from bad to worse, with the civilian casualties jumped into more than 3,000 civilians, an 11% increase compared to the years before, including almost 1,000 children, which is a very serious humanitarian crisis that could only be ended through a comprehensive and permanent ceasefire. However, many Afghans have constantly criticized the peace process because basically it excluded the Afghan government and in general all Afghan people. And we had no clue what decisions have been decided about our future. And the negotiations were taking place in secrecy. But with the cancellation of the peace process, all Afghan people felt and disappointed and shocked. While there is still a possibility to restart and revive the dead peace negotiations with Taliban, we would like to remind all parties into the conflict to recognize the need for inclusivity and recognize the need to participate the public perception and recognize the public perception. And because this is important, and before deciding anything on behalf of the whole Afghan nation, it's important to recognize the public perception. Afghan people from all across Afghanistan in the Peace Laureate Jirga, Afghan Women's National Consensus for Peace, and with the social media campaign with the hashtag of my red line, have raised their voices and voiced their concerns about their future and asked the global community and asked the parties into the conflict to recognize their limits and their red lines, and to recognize their limits and their red lines and respect and protect them in any possible peace deal. Our red lines might be different as individuals, but as a nation, our red line is Afghan people's achievements that has been gained over the past 18 years. In particular, our constitution, freedom of speech, our democratic institutions, human rights, and women's rights. One of our most important desire and one of our most important requests from the parties into the conflict is, in order to implement and protect and respect these red lines, we need intra-Afghan talks. We need a permanent ceasefire and a meaningful participation of representatives of women, youth, and the civil society in the process. Ladies and gentlemen, one of our most prominent achievements over the past 18 years is a transformed Afghanistan that is able to give space and accommodate women in the society. The reason why I would like to focus on women today is because they were the main victims over the years of war in Afghanistan, and they will lose the most if a peace deal does not include provisions to protect their rights and achievements. Afghan women back then were deprived of their basic human rights. They were banned from going to school. They were banned from participating in social activities, and even banned from existing. But today, in Afghanistan, women are represented in art, culture, education, economics, sport, and even in military service. And this is a big transformation. But beside all these, we shall not forget those women who live in the remote areas, those women who live under the Taliban's control. The story for them is different. The fight for their rights backseat for their struggle to survival. They suffer from the violence at the hand of Taliban and the late-night airstrikes at the same time. So peace and security is a priority for them. And while fighting for the women's right, we have to consider their right for life, and we have to fight for them as well. But all Afghan women's consensus for their red line and the peace is the same. We want a peace, the one that preserves the last 18 years' achievements, the one that does not compromise the Afghan people's sacrifices for freedom of speech, for democracy and women's rights. Ladies and gentlemen, the 4 decades-long war had a very heavy toll on civilians. Our country lost its finest ones, and many families lost their beloved ones. And this time, we do not want a shift in the ship of conflict. We want a real peace and an ending point to the grievances and miseries of Afghan people. For history, our future and fate have always been shaped and decided by the warring parties. But this time, we want to remind the global community that we have a strong, educated, and committed generation that is ready to shape their future and the future of the next generation with their own hands, that deserve a seat and a voice on the negotiating table. And we want them to recognize that despite our desperation for peace and security, we have all come a long way since 2001, and going back is not an option for us. Thank you very much.